I almost didn't answer the phone that afternoon. It was a Tuesday in late October, and I'd spent most of the morning sitting in the chair by the window, the one my wife used to call mine, even though she was the one who picked it out. The leaves on the oak in the front yard had gone yellow. She would have said something about that. She always did, every year, like it was a surprise worth announcing. The call came from a number I didn't recognize, with a local area code. I let it ring twice before I picked up. The man on the other end introduced himself as Gerald Tate, a senior representative from Hargrove and Mills Estate Services. He told me that my wife's estate, our estate, though it still felt wrong to say that, couldn't be fully settled until I came in and addressed something in person. He was careful about his wording. He didn't say what the something was. I asked him to clarify. He said it would be better if we spoke face to face. I told him I'd be there Thursday morning. For 2 days I assumed it was paperwork. My wife, Carolyn, had been meticulous about documents. 34 years of marriage, and she had a folder for everything. Warranties for appliances we'd replaced 10 years ago. Receipts from contractors. Insurance policies in color-coded binders. When she died 14 months ago from a stroke she didn't survive, I was grateful for the binders. They made the first week slightly less impossible. I drove to the Hargrove and Mills office on Thursday with a cup of coffee I didn't finish and a vague sense of inconvenience. I was not prepared for what came next. Gerald Tate met me in the lobby. He was younger than his voice suggested, maybe mid-40s, with a cautious handshake and the kind of expression that tells you someone is trying to decide how to start a difficult conversation. He asked if I wanted water. I said no. He asked if I wanted to sit down. I said I'd prefer to stand until I knew why I was there. He paused. Then he said, "Before we go over the estate documents, there's something I need to show you. Something that came to our attention 2 weeks ago." He led me down a short hallway to a private office with frosted glass walls. He closed the door and set a thin manila folder on the desk between us. "Mr. Whitfield," he said, "are you familiar with a man named Raymond Corso?" The name hit me somewhere behind my sternum. Raymond Corso had been my business partner for 19 years. We had built a mid-sized property management company together starting in our early 40s, back when I had more energy than good sense, and Raymond had a gift for finding clients that I still don't fully understand. He could walk into a room full of strangers and come out with 3 signed contracts. I handled the operations, the licensing, the compliance. He handled the relationships. I told Gerald yes, I knew Raymond. Gerald opened the folder. What was inside was a printout of a financial statement, and next to it, a handwritten note on pale blue stationery that I recognized immediately. Caroline had used that stationery for personal correspondence for 20 years. It was her handwriting. The date at the top was 16 months ago, 2 months before she died. I reached for it. "Gerald, let me take it." I won't recite every word she wrote, but the short version is this. Caroline had discovered something, and she had brought what she found to Hargrove and Mills and asked them to hold it for me. She told them not to reach out unless the estate settlement required it, or unless 18 months passed without me coming in on my own. 14 months had passed. The settlement paperwork had triggered the contact. She had known something was wrong. She hadn't told me because she was still building the proof. That was exactly like her. She didn't make accusations. She gathered evidence first. I sat down then. Raymond Corso and I had structured our company as a 50-50 partnership. I was the majority signer on operational accounts, and Raymond managed what we called the client services side of the books, which in practice meant he handled billing, collections, and the accounts we maintained for larger property management contracts. 12 years in, when the business had grown past what either of us had expected, Raymond suggested we bring in his nephew, a man named Derek, to help manage some of the administrative load. Derek was 29 at the time, personable and quick. I had no objection. Raymond vouched for him personally, and the numbers were good. We were growing. I didn't look too carefully at what Derek was actually doing. That was my mistake. I've understood it for a while now, but seeing it laid out in my wife's handwriting made the understanding land differently. What Caroline had found, working backward through records she wasn't even supposed to be looking at, was a second structure running alongside our real business. Raymond and Derek had quietly built it over the course of several years. Contracts were being double-billed. Client payments on certain accounts were being diverted to a shell company that Derek managed under a different name. The amounts weren't catastrophic in any single month, but compounded over years, the figure Caroline had written in the corner of her note was significant enough to make my hands cold. She had discovered it because of a discrepancy in a spreadsheet I'd asked her to glance at. Something small, the kind of rounding error that should have been invisible. But Caroline didn't let small things go. She started pulling threads and didn't stop until she had a picture she could document. The note said she wasn't ready to show me yet. She wrote that she knew how I felt about Raymond and she didn't want me making a decision based on anger before she had finished building the case. She wrote that she was sorry for keeping it from me, that it felt like a small betrayal, even in service of protecting me, and that she hoped by the time I read the letter everything had been resolved one way or another. It hadn't been resolved. She died before she finished, and I had gone 14 months without knowing any of it. I sat in that office for a long time. Gerald Tate didn't rush me. When I finally asked him how the firm had come to have the documents, he explained that Caroline had visited their office in person and asked to use them as a kind of private holding service. She'd paid a small administrative fee. She told them it was a personal matter and asked that they keep it confidential until the conditions she specified were met. He said it was unusual, but not unprecedented. He said she'd been very calm about it. Professional, he said, like she'd thought it through carefully. That was her, exactly. I drove home and sat in the kitchen and didn't eat anything for several hours. I thought about Raymond. 19 years. I thought about Derek, who used to bring his dog to the occasional company picnic, a big cheerful retriever named something I couldn't remember. I thought about the fact that I had been the senior partner, the one with the operational oversight, and I had stopped looking closely at certain numbers because the growth line was heading in the right direction and I trusted the person standing next to me. That's the thing about trust when it's abused. It doesn't look like naivety from the inside. It looks like efficiency. It looks like a reasonable division of labor. You tell yourself that you're being smart by not micromanaging, by letting people do their jobs. You don't realize until much later that what you were actually doing was creating a gap just wide enough to be useful to someone who wanted to use it. Raymond had seen that gap before I did. The following week I met with an attorney named Sandra Pruitt, who had been recommended by an acquaintance in the industry. I brought everything Caroline had compiled, plus the additional records I'd pulled myself over the weekend, working through folders I hadn't opened in years. What I found confirmed what Caroline had found, and added a few details she hadn't gotten to yet. Sandra reviewed everything over 2 days and then called me and said 3 things. First, the case was strong. Second, it would take time. Third, I needed to decide what I wanted out of it before we moved forward, because that decision would shape every step that followed. I told her I wanted 2 things. I wanted the money accounted for, and I wanted Raymond and Derek to answer for what they'd done. Not out of rage, the rage had passed by then, replaced by something colder and more deliberate. I simply didn't think they should walk away from it. The process that followed was not quick, and I won't pretend it was simple. There were depositions and counterfilings and a mediation session that lasted 9 hours and resolved nothing. Raymond's attorney tried to characterize the shell company as a legitimate subsidiary that I had tacitly approved by not raising objections. That argument did not hold up to Caroline's documentation, which was organized with the kind of precision that apparently impressed more than one person in that room. Derek eventually settled separately. He was younger, and his attorney advised him to cooperate, and he did. What he disclosed in that cooperation filled in several gaps that I hadn't been able to close on my own. Raymond did not settle easily. He was not the kind of man who admitted things if there was any other path available. But the path ran out. By the following spring, the financial judgment had been entered. I will not say what the number was, but I will say that Caroline's estimate, written in the corner of a piece of pale blue stationery 16 months before any of this reached a resolution, was accurate within a margin that I found both unsurprising and quietly devastating. There is one more thing I want to say, and I have tried to find the right way to say it for a while now. I was 63 years old when my wife died. I am 65 now. I had spent my adult life building something, and I thought I understood it. I thought I understood the people in it. Raymond used to come to our house for dinner. He sat at our table. He knew the names of our children. He knew Caroline's birthday because he'd been in my office when I was ordering flowers. I don't say this to build sympathy for myself. I say it because I think there's something important in recognizing how ordinary it all looked from the outside. You don't get betrayed by strangers. Strangers don't have the access. The people who can hurt you the most are the ones you've already let into the architecture of your life, the ones who know where the load-bearing walls are. Raymond knew our business the way you only know something after years of daily proximity, and he used that knowledge in a direction I wasn't watching. What Caroline understood, and what I'm still trying to fully absorb, is that proximity is not the same as loyalty. Familiarity is not the same as trustworthiness. The length of a relationship doesn't inoculate it against the possibility that one party has decided the relationship is primarily useful to them. She knew all that. She watched carefully. She didn't assume. I've been going through the process of restructuring the company now, with new partners, new accounting oversight, new agreements drafted by Sandra that close every gap I can identify, and a few I wouldn't have thought of on my own. It's slower work than I expected, and some days it feels like rebuilding after a fire. You know the structure, you know what goes where, but everything takes longer, and some of what you thought was solid turns out to have been held up by things that aren't there anymore. Some mornings I still sit in the chair by the window. The oak tree out front has been bare for months, and soon enough the new leaves will come in. Caroline would have said something about that too. She always marked the arrivals as carefully as the losses. I kept the note. I keep it in the top drawer of the desk in my home office, folded into thirds the way she'd left it. I don't read it often. I don't need to read it to know what it says. What it says underneath all the careful documentation and the practical instructions and the dates and figures is that she was still looking out for me even when she was running out of time to do it. I've tried to deserve that. I ask more questions now than I used to. I look more carefully at the things I used to glance past. I don't confuse the comfort of a long relationship with the evidence of its integrity. I'm not sure I would have gotten there on my own, but then I didn't have to.